Hi, Bryce. This is me, Project Stuart, interviewing Bryce Lynch. Bryce, I was hoping to speak to you with Mellon last week, but that didn't happen because of various things. So I'll just pretend that he's here, and we can run imaginary arguments between anything. He might have said anything you want to say. Now you have the advantage because you've travelled in time. So for anyone, I've only done like 3 interviews in my life. This is the second time I've interviewed you, which means I must like you a lot. The last one was on my blogs at some point. So for anyone who doesn't know who you are, would you mind telling our audience of no people now and maybe 50 people later on who you are?
Sure. I am Bryce Lynch. I live in Indianapolis, and I run the website 10footpole.org. It is targeted exclusively at reviews of Dungeons & Dragons adventures, or RPG fantasy adventures, we might say, with a particular focus on old school type adventures, I would say.
Right. I think you might have done more reviews of more D&D stuff than maybe anyone I know of. Do you think anyone's beaten your numbers?
I don't know. I think I'm floating. If we count the individual adventures in Dungeon Magazine, then I may have read and reviewed, analyzed to some extent, probably around 2,000 adventures at this point, with maybe 1,500 or so blog entries about them. So I think I've done a lot, particularly in this space. If there is someone, they probably live on RPG Now or something, or not RPG Now, it's RPG Now, and are focused on freebies or something. I don't know.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask with Mellon that I was interested in with you as well is what your current play situation is like. Like, are you playing like yourself? Are you running? What kind of people are you running for? Online, offline, and like session length, stuff like that.
Sure. So I play maybe 2.5 times a week. So regular Monday games and that are private, and then pickup games at a game store constitute sort of my regular.
That's interesting.
Yes, I have a lot to say about that. And then maybe an online game twice a month or so where I float around and pick up for a one shot or something.
So you're doing the full thing. That's very respectable. So you're doing like private 3D sessions with people you know, and you're doing the dreaded pickup game with people at store, people you never met, and you're doing the classic OSR thing of like a G+ game, basically. Is that right? And you're frozen. So if you're replying, I can't see it.
Oh, you're back.
You're back. How much of that did you get?
I
am going to... Okay, so you're fading in and out. Let me see if I can do something to fix that. Do you know how to fix the settings on this bandwidth usage? Let's put that right down.
Yeah, let me do that on my end too. Oh, I don't think I can. I think you get to do that for me.
Well, I've gone down to the minimal setting for bandwidth. Let me do it again.
Okay.
I'll have to keep it on video, otherwise the whole thing of it being a video becomes kind of ridiculous. Hopefully that won't cut out again. So how much of that did you get? I was asking about you're doing a full range of different kinds of gaming, basically. You're doing the classical private game with friends in 3D, you're doing the dreaded club game, which is kind of like the dreaded con game, and doing like the G+ game where you have a bunch of like hipster nerds on G+, and you do it over the Hangout. So what have you noticed in the differences between those groups? Briefly.
So let me start with the one I have the strongest feelings about, and those are the public games.
Right.
For a long time, my wife ran a very large gaming meetup in Indianapolis, and so we had a lot of public gaming parties, both board games and RPGs. And to be polite, it attracts a diverse group of players.
Right.
So the theory that she developed, and I will repeat, is that people would show up to these public games, let's say new people in town or new to the hobby, and they would find like-minded individuals, and then they would split off and go form their own private group, and we wouldn't see them again. Which means that the repeat folks that we tended to get were people who were unable to form attachments for some reason and go away and join their own private group. So we had a lot of very special individuals in public games, and I tend to feel like many public games end up that way. I still think it's fun. I like meeting new people. I like particularly exposing folks to sort of an older mentality of gaming, or a different mentality of gaming than they currently do. But there's a lot of social aspects to controlling the table in the situation with folks who perhaps weren't socialized the best. And that's coming from me.
Right, yeah. I mean, I've always thought the people who are into RPGs, usually there's something slightly cracked about us. So I know in many cases it's people who like really want rules for doing basic social stuff, or it's a complicated gender thing, or they've got some whacked out political ideas, or they've had like a weird upbringing, or all of those just jammed into one thing.
That's no, certainly that's a generalization, right? And there are a lot of really great people that we've met in public games that have joined the private games and have split off. But it's an aspect to public culture. It forces you to be on your toes as a DM, right? So
Right.
you have these situations that pop up where someone's behavior is unacceptable, and you have to control that.
So how do you? That's interesting, but I'm meant to be asking you about reviews. Do you take that into account when you're doing reviews? Because there are some elements of adventure design which people go on about often in forums, which are almost defensive, and there are like cultures of RPG design, some of which I would describe as being limiting what you're talking about, taking a group of weirdos who may or may not have good or bad social skills we've never met, and limiting their ability to screw things up with rules, and others which are more like maximizing the possibilities for a group of people who are relatively together socially and mentally. Do you think that's fair or an insane way to look at?
No, that's an insane way to look. We don't pander to the lowest common denominator. We should not pander to the lowest common denominator. To target your audience down a very strict path, it just seems like insanity to me. You can't anticipate all of the situations that are going to come up, all of the rails that you have to put on the lane. And to try to write an adventure that way just seems like madness to me, this sort of extremely controlled environment. Now, I'm sure there are probably people that enjoy playing that way. That's great. But I would suggest that perhaps that's a niche off of the main line of hobby gaming.
So you definitely do things in 3D, right? You wouldn't basically, instead of letting the adventure design handle those kinds of problems, you would do it yourself. Is that right? You would say that would be something that you've got behaviors and ways to help people.
That's right.
Okay, cool. Let me see. We were talking about Mellon. Did you see the interview with Mellon or Gabor looks?
I think I fast forwarded through a lot of it.
Okay.
On the parts that mentioned my name, of course.
Okay. Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to comment on or disagree with, or agree with?
No, I think he shares a lot of my same views, or I might say I share a lot of his views. I think he's quite an influential voice, and certainly one that I listened to as I was getting back into OSR sorts of gaming, older types of gaming, and I think he has some very interesting thoughts, many of which or most of which are I would term correct, right? I think we're in general agreement on almost everything that I saw.
Wonderful. I'll kick in with a question from G+.
Wait.
Yes.
He's low adventure standards, man.
Really?
No one has higher standards than me.
Finally, some drama.
5-star reviews for things that I wouldn't give that benefit to are I think interesting. But I think I have a peculiar philosophy there, where I only want the best. Right? There's no room for mediocrity at all.
Right. So I don't know if Gabor has his, you've literally got your standards for review literally written down. I mean, explicitly, so everyone can see what your standards are and they can compare what you say to your standards so that they have anyone reading your reviews for the first time should be able to work out where you are relative to them. Do you think that's a good idea for reviewers? Not just to have their personality and standards out there, but literally to have them explicitly out there saying, this is what I look for.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good idea. I don't think it's required.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the old Siskel and Ebert movie reviews in the U.S. you find a movie reviewer that you identify with that has mostly the same standards that you do.
Right.
Do that by watching them repeatedly and then going to see movies and forming your own opinion kind of in relation to theirs. I think by writing things down, you're just kind of skipping a few steps. So we're making it a little easier for folks to understand the biases I bring or not. And if they're looking for story-based adventures, then I might not be the site for them, and hopefully they might understand that from, or maybe I'd be a great site. They just have to look at everything I hate.
Fiona wanted to ask basically, where do you think is the line between evocative and opaque? Specifically because you like evocative word usage and it influences how she tries to write things, but occasionally people mention they have to dictionary reference stuff. Cowards. And her question is, where's the happy medium between something that really anchors the description and something that makes readers scratch their head?
Yeah, so this gets back to that Gygaxian prose, right? And I know I poured over my first edition DMG in probably junior high school and learned a lot of new words, like chaos and things like that. I think you're free to use the language however you want. If you can make yourself understood, Jabberwocky is a good example of that, right? Then it doesn't matter. The intent of the writing is to create a picture in the DM's head. And whatever you have to do that is okay. Misspell a word, screw with grammar, screw with formatting, it doesn't matter. As long as it's completely focused on creating this imagery inside the DM's head. Because once it's in there, once you've successfully transferred your idea to the DM, then they can transfer it onto the table and it's their own at that point. They can ad lib and create something magnificent from it. And if you have to do that with $6 words, then do it with $6 words. Maybe folks will learn how to use dictionaries again.
Jabberwocky basically took a long time to write. I have like Lewis Carroll's collected things, which I'm only halfway through. And you have he has the initial notes for Jabberwocky, which he came up with individual imaginary etymologies for every word in his initial sketch of the poem. And he's got them defined. And then that happened like 5-10 years before the actual poem comes out. So I don't know how long he took to do that, but it was a long time.
Maybe you don't need to do that for an adventure.
I feel bad if I'm not sending people to etymology dictionaries at least once with every adventure, like I'm letting them down. Coney Campbell wants to ask, who do you think the adventures are written for? I suppose that kicks me in my idea of a lot of, I don't know how many adventures get run out of all that are sold and read, but it must be like 10%, maybe 30%.
Mm. So I've heard that for a long time, and I'm not sure where it came from. Maybe it came from the Paizo folks, or a study they did, or a study that WotC or TSR did. Something about most adventures being purchased just to be read and not to be run. And I'm not sure whether. I guess I have no basis for understanding that, but I certainly know that if an adventure isn't written to be run at the table, then I think it fails at being an adventure at a very core level. That's kind of what an adventure is supposed to be. I have been told I have a strict taxonomy at points. But if it's not written to be run at the table, then it's a regional setting or it's a novelization. It may look like an adventure with a room key format, but if it's not being written to be run at the table, then it's not an adventure. That is the core of what makes an adventure in my mind. And that's, I think, where many of my standards start. The, divergence in, let's say, from maybe late second edition, late first edition through the modern age of expanding adventures with all of this text and making rooms incomprehensible. I chalk that up not to being written for a different audience, but the evils of paperword and how paperword encourages the author to bloat the text. It's easier to have one idea and bloat that to 12 pages than it is to have 100 ideas written well.
Yeah, the two forms that I'm familiar with that require idea that really feed off maximizing ideas per page or ideas per text. It's comics and D&D adventures. They just demand novelty at a greater rate than almost anything else I can think of. The way I've started to think about it is kind of like one of those weirdly intense jobs, like being a surgeon or a soldier, or like where you do one thing intensively for like 5% of the time, and the rest of the time you're just kind of like not ticking around, but you're polishing things, looking through manuals, doing checklists, practicing, and so playing D&D is kind of like that. Where if you're looking at an adventure, even if you're not going to run it, you're kind of imagining running it, and in some way, it's kind of helping you be better at playing D&D or running D&D. So even if it's not going to get run, the fact that it's not made to be run makes you worse somehow because it's like mental fluff.
Makes you worse.
Kind of, if you imagine, say, like, if you're, this is kind of talking like in this slightly bullshit phrase about people who use very high skill jobs. And I'm not sure if that qualifies for D&D, but like, if you, they say like if you want to be a really great fencer or a great surgeon, you need to train with very, very good people. And I've heard it said that people who could have been good fencers, reading a book on swordcraft ages ago, failed because they trained only with the people they knew, or they didn't like level up, or they didn't train against the best, and so skills that might have become very good kind of diminished. And in some ways, I wonder if like filling your head with like lots and lots and lots of relatively low level stuff, after a while it kind of becomes a grind, and you're not picking up anything new, and you're just kind of getting resentment of it, where you kind of I dislike it, and then I feed off my own dislike of it, and I kind of turn into a kind of a crabbed, golem-esque, wrathful figure.
And you probably reset what you believe normal is, right?
Right.
Whether consciously or subconsciously, that becomes the norm, and that's what you expect, and that's the way you drift.
That might be true. It's kind of a little bit worrying. I'll ask a very simple question. Simon Foster wanted to know how important you think maps are to an adventure.
Oh, yeah, I think maps are. Well, I guess it depends. So when I think of an adventure, I think the classic exploratory dungeon adventure or site-based adventure, and clearly the map is extremely important there. I was just looking at something today that had an isometric map that I thought was great in order to give scale and perspective and relative locations and sort of where are the windows of the structure that you're trying to get in. How can I get in from the roof or the tree next door or something? The ability to communicate all of this information non-verbally, the whole picture worth 1,000 words thing. In addition, maps have a tremendous ability to convey vast quantities of information, I think much more than they do today. Today we get maybe room dimensions off of them in a key number, but slapping the name of the room on the map or color coding it for light or sound to give the DM some indication of where other encounters may, say, meld into this one. I think that's extremely useful information and something that most folks don't take advantage of.
I know. I think unless as from my experience, unless you're doing the maps and the layout and the text yourself, incorporating the maps into adventure design is quite challenging because you're talking about page layout, and then whichever comes first. Maybe in my case, it's the writing comes first. And then once you've got the map, you're kind of reorienting and rewriting everything to kind of fit in and getting that nice, smooth block of that flow of information where everything is used to the best possible extent. It's kind of like beating yourself in the head with a hammer. It's harder than it would seem, to me at least.
Sam had a great article on how he creates map on his Grogan blog site. Sham is a great site, and I wish he'd update it. And he had this excellent article on how he creates maps and keys them. And his maps have this huge amount of eraser marks on them. He creates a map, he starts thinking about encounters based on the map. Then he goes and erases the map and redraws chunks of it based on his ideas for the encounters. So it's very much a kind of back and forth. I think it's one of the most insightful things I ever saw on homemade map creation and how it kind of melds into adventure design.
And if people watching you want to Google that to find it, what would they type in?
So I can send you to the site. It's Sham Grogan blog. I'm not sure the name of the article, though. I think he's got it linked maybe in one of his hot links. He hasn't been active for many years now.
Okay.
He was one of the, I think, original guys.
I will see if I can find it online and dump it in the description down below. kind of a lighter question now, just from me. Have you found anything out about the creator of Unbalanced Dice Games? Because they're still creating and they're still making new stuff.
No, but the fact that they don't attach their name to it and haven't attached their name to it from day one means that something's up. This is somebody we know. Somebody we know, and by we I mean somebody in the community. This is going to be somebody in the community, and they're having some fun. I think. I would hope that's the case. The fact that there is no indication anywhere of who this is means the identity is, I think, being hidden.
For anyone watching who's not familiar with this, there's a creator who releases through RPG now who creates games under their name, Unbalanced Dice Games, and they have a game in adventure style, which is kind of might be someone who has learning disabilities, might be someone on the Asperger spectrum, might be someone running some kind of art scam, might be faux naive, like adventure design. We just don't know. And they're excited. Their adventures are a combination of childlike, inventive, crazy, and just odd. And it's weirdly captivating. Both of them read their adventures and won't work out who the hell they are.
Fascinating, right? As you go through it, some of the elements are marvelous, right?
Right. So if anyone does find out, if anyone wants to help solve the mystery, I guess there'll be comments below, link in the comments. Jacob first wanted to ask, this is something that's interesting to me. How do we get you to review expensive books without breaking your bank or rolling you down the slippery slope of indie authors corrupting you by inundating you with piles of free shit?
I think I make enough money that I can review expensive books. I don't think expense is an issue. I think, even if books were $20, $25 a pop for the stuff I review, I think I could swing that pretty easily. I would love if the online sellers, particularly the PDF sellers, had a return policy. You know, and to give them a little push in that direction, I started buying more games on Steam once I found their no questions asked return policy. So you can buy a game, download it, try it. If it doesn't meet your expectations, you can ask for a refund, and they give you a refund, as long as you played it less than 2 or 4 hours or something like that. Now, clearly there's issues with PDFs, and that system can always be abused, but it's led on Steam to me purchasing significantly more games because I have some confidence now that I'm not being ripped off. This isn't going to be a pile of junk that I fell victim to the marketing for. I don't have to research it extensively to figure out if I'd like it. As a buyer rather than a reviewer, I'd love something like that for the online sites. But in terms of book cost, I think I'm a victim right now of the way in which I choose adventures. I have a long list, and I go in almost every morning and sort by price, lowest price first, and I start at the top and I go down the list until I find something that I'm interested in reviewing, and then I pick that. Somewhere, I think at the bottom of that list is the Blight or some frog god thing that's $40 or $50. I'll get to that one day.
Okay. Let me see. What do you think? Oh, this is from Chris. What do you think of the recycling of classic adventures from TSR's past, like Strahd, Azrak, Tiamat, Undermountain? And do you ever see Wizards of the Coast putting out new adventures, or just relying on community content through DM's Guild?
Oh my!
I think he asked that especially because you've been reviewing a lot of 5e stuff. Which I think, is that still true?
I am. So I try on the weekend to have a review for something that's not specifically old school, so 5e or Pathfinder or maybe something else, some special review. So I guess recycling. I think he's talking. Did you say he was talking specifically about Return to the Tomb of Horrors and those sorts of?
He mentioned Strahd, Azrak, Tiamat, and Undermountain specifically.
Yeah, I mean they're clearly targeting the nostalgia market here, right? They know. I think who a significant portion of their market is, the older gamers who are going to be called in by that. And then the younger gamers who don't know it get exposed to it as well. So I think it's a clever marketing strategy. I don't think I mind. I'd love to see new things developed, but it's just like with movie sequels. These large corporations, they don't take chances, right? They don't develop new properties.
Mm-hmm.
They repeat the old ones over and over again. So I guess I expect it from them. And they didn't do such a bad job with Strahd. I thought it was an okay sort of adventure. Some of the others have been pretty poor. I think they redid the Giants. I don't think I even reviewed that. I heard it was so bad. So I guess that doesn't bother me. And what was the follow-up?
I think that was it. What was he? Did you ever see them putting on? Do you ever see them putting on new adventures themselves, or just relying on community content through the DMs Guild? With the OSR putting out great stuff, should anyone care?
So they'll put out new things when the corporate behemoth decides that they should put out new things. So I am completely convinced that that company is being run in order to maximize the D&D brand, and they will do whatever it takes to get D&D movies into production so that they can get onto the Marvel, Hasbro, G.I. Joe, Transformers bandwagon. Hasbro wouldn't own that property unless they saw cross-marketing possibilities. They would have cut it by now. I think somebody sees the potential of making a lot of money with D&D through other media properties, and that's where they're aimed for. So I think to answer that question, you have to ask yourself or start going down the road of where at what point does it become advantageous for the mega corporation to make money? And if that leads them to new things, then they'll go new things.
What do you think of Critical Role and stuff like that? Because I haven't really watched any of it. I'm not very familiar with it, but it's because I'm a cranky reactionary and get the general sense that I probably wouldn't like it.
That's the YouTube series where they like play D&D-ish, is that it?
Yeah, it's hugely popular for like a lot of people. I think it's the Critical Role and stuff like it are the main entry. I think it's been regarded as being one of the main reasons that D&D's been getting so massive. There's loads of people who watch it on YouTube. There's a big market for that kind of thing. And we're seeing people on RPG now and other places both being very happy about it and complaining because it's affecting the expectations and play style. And there's lots of threads on Reddit and stuff like, what should I do if people want to play like Critical Role? And it goes back and forth quite a bit.
You know, my kids watch people playing video games on Twitch and YouTube, and I don't understand it completely, but they love it. And I think that's the Critical Role stuff probably falls into the same category. Whatever it takes to get players in the seats, I think is okay. At some point, some percentage of those players will be exposed to other play styles and drift into that as well. The more Dungeons and Dragons that is exposed to the public, the more players we have, I think the more vibrant the community will be. I think for a long time, it's been just hanging on. And the advent of a younger crowd brought in by things like Critical Role and so on, I think does wonders for getting new players in. I've had lots of younger players, players that have seen Critical Role, and I've never had a problem with them adjusting. In fact, I distinctly remember a couple that came to a game, must have been 1920 maybe, and they were clearly accustomed to that sort of play style. And man, once they picked up on shivving little kids in the face in order to get their gold pouches, they were, once they learned kind of the new rules of do whatever you want, right? I'm not here to punish you or reward you. We're just going to move the thing down based on what you do. They picked up and ran with it. So the more players we get, I think the better. Now, I will say, I have watched Harmon Quest, and I am a fan of Harmon Quest. So that's I think similar to Critical Role. It's something that he did, and I think is on his in-person interviews. He had a DM run a little D&D game for a bit. Then they started filming up some production values. I thought the first season was magnificent. That's been my foray into it, but that leans itself closer to television than it does, say, the Critical Role sorts of things.
Right. Ian Riley wanted to ask, I'd be interested in hearing their thoughts on what can make vanilla, in quotes, fantasy interesting without simply veering into gonzo or Patrick-style hipster conversion.
I think you're redefining the hipster look there. No, I think all it takes is a little thoughtfulness to make vanilla great. So a lot of vanilla is based on classic, ideas. The passage behind the waterfall, or the falling chandelier, or the bookcase with the secret passage behind it. And those can be badly done, or they can be well done. If you think about it and put in these sorts of well-reasoned elements to it, I think you can come out with an excellent vanilla adventure. I've seen many great vanilla adventures and tagged them on my list. I think it takes just a little extra thought, though. It's easy to say cockroach people built the temple. That's great. But once you go down the path of it's dwarven ruins, to do something that I've been harping on recently, you need to do a little more there. You can't just say it's dwarven ruins anymore. You need a little more. The old trope of your caravan guards, that's why you're in town. Well, you can do a little bit more with that and add a couple of personalities, add a subplot to that, and it turns the vanilla into something meaningful. I think we confuse vanilla with generic. There's nothing wrong with vanilla. There's a lot wrong with generic. I'm not paying for generic.
Can you give me like a living example, or that's like a more like textual like thing of the borderline between vanilla and generic? I guess it's like pornography, and like, you know it when you see it. Anything you can speak to in that would be interesting.
I think I was just reading the scenario from Ontario, and one of the adventures there has you in Canada, and there are some hooks, and a lot of the hooks are you're hired to do something, or go find the missing whatever, just kind of the generic sorts of things. But then there's another. It's based around go find somebody, go find the missing business owner. Well, that's kind of generic. But then they add a little bit to it. They say, because she has wronged you and you want revenge, and by God, no monster's going to get revenge on this woman. You're going to take revenge on her. And I thought, how fabulous, right? This isn't just, I'm hiring you to go find what's her name. This is a strong personal motivation for you that I think is instantly recognizable and people grasp onto. And it's just adding that little bit more, one extra sentence, so that you can take revenge on her. There will be no monster doing that. She won't get off that easy. Just that little bit more, that one extra sentence turns it from something generic into something that's still relatively vanilla. There's no gonzo in that, right? But it's much more meaningful and much more colorful. It adds so much depth to it. There's a human element to it.
Right. So adjective rather than recontextualizing. I don't know if you saw this bit with I was speaking to Mellon about irony. He was talking about relatively vanilla fantasy. He was saying that one of the things he tries to do is to present it like shorn of its later interpretations and try and focus on it almost directly, exactly express it as it is, without like a postmodern or like secondary sheen. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because it's something that I kind of respect a lot, but it's something I find very hard to do.
I think it's easy to go down the irony route. We used to do art together, my family, and inevitably my art would be the ironic stuff because I'm not an artist, right? And it was the easiest thing to do. So when I had to do a fruit bowl, it was the words. I typed the word orange in the shape of an orange over and over again, and apple in the shape of an apple. This sort of ironic postmodernism, as you would say. I even have a name for it. I call myself Poopy when I engage in this activity. I went to see an Ai Weiwei exhibit where he was dropping a Ming vase at the local art museum. And I thought, well, that's just garbage. That's not art. Yeah, I know what he's trying to do here. That's just garbage. So I think it's very easy to do. And because it's very easy to do, I don't think there's much value in it. Again, I think you said, Mellon said, examine the original idea. And I think when you look at the original idea, generally, these sorts of original ideas are still around and exist today because there's something pretty basic that draws us to them. This whole idea of, the numbers 3 or some of the things that come from folklore. I think there's something, this is sort of, I like to sometimes refer to it as a shared cultural memory or an ancestral memory that we have that seems to draw us in those directions. And I think the closer you get to that, the more interesting and relatable the adventure is, or the idea is, I should say.
All right. To take it back and swing it kind of the other way, rather than things being 2+1 or 2+3, is there any borderline for you for something being too cheesy, too vanilla?
Oh, too cheesy, certainly. I was ruined at some age by the Castle Greyhawk adventure that I bought, and turned out to be a joke adventure. So this was after Gygax was booted, and they put out, finally, his dungeon was released, Castle Greyhawk. Well, wouldn't want that, right? So I eagerly scrape together my dimes and go buy it, and it's a joke adventure, and it's based around making fun of him and his Hollywood adventures and all of that nonsense. And that colored my acceptance of cheesy things for quite some time, especially things that are written to be cheesy or jokey. When those elements come up naturally during the game, I love that. Or if there's an offline someplace in the adventure, I love that. But when the focus of the adventure is on the cheese, that's easy to do. There's no value there. I guess there are groups that are kind of like into that, maybe, or maybe it's con-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the value, though.
This is something you may not have any interest in, but something that I thought about when basically there are very few things that I review. Usually, if I don't like something, I just won't bother reading it all the way through, so I can't review it. If I do like it, I've got no problems saying people it's nice, but there's a small smattering of things where I read it all the way through, and I actually find that I don't like it as much as I wished I'd had. And in those cases, I'm faced with a particular problem of giving a bad review or just not saying anything, which is kind of like fake in its own way. And especially because everyone in the community kind of knows each other, and there's a kind of like endless fluxion of like social and different like contacts between everyone. How do you deal, or have you ever had to deal with the idea of hurting someone's feelings by reviewing something badly?
So I guess I have two specific examples I might cite there. The first was probably the first bad review I ever wrote. And I read this adventure by Alfonso Warden. I think he's English, and I think he may have passed away by now. And it was just, I hated it. I hated everything about it. I think it was the first one I stumbled upon. So I had been kind of middling on some adventures, and this one, man, I just couldn't stand it. I just thought it was terrible. And I messaged somebody on Dragon's Foot who had also reviewed it, and I said, "Did you really like this? You know, this is just garbage." And he said, I forget what he said, but it caused me to write that, this thing was just garbage. And it was the first one I had ever written. And again, you feel like you're a part of a community, and you're saying, this is just terrible. And I got a reply back after I wrote it from, I think, Matt Finch, who said something to the effect of, "I thought you were one of those guys who liked everything. I guess not." And boy, that did wonders for letting me know that I had done the right thing by not just being another reviewer that softballed things. One of the problems I was having at that time was I was super excited, back into the OSR, and was buying all this stuff that people said was great. People say a lot of things are great, and it's not. And I was maybe getting a little disillusioned. And so at that point, I thought, well, I'm gonna write some notes down, and those notes became my reviews, and then we got to the really negative ones. So there's that example. And then the other example was with, I think, Bloody Mage. Steve Winton Wilson, something like that. His adventures were incomprehensible. And I wrote a bad review, and then I found out he had died like 2 weeks earlier. I thought, man, it feels like kicking somebody when they're down.
Right.
And someone had said something, when I said that online, to the effect of, "No, you should go ahead and review these. It's part of his legacy, right? It's part of what he created. It's part of who he was." So I went ahead and did the reviews of that and a few others that I'd already purchased. But I think those are the times when I feel the worst. When I'm feeling the most generous, I like to say that whatever the author was trying to convey, they didn't quite do it successfully. They didn't manage to transfer their ideas across. That's when I'm being generous. When I'm not being generous is when folks, I think, are trying to get away with something or trying to rip off or just trying blatant conversions or something that there's some ulterior motive other than putting out a great product.
Okay. High-level adventures. There are, as far as I know, there are no like guaranteed good high-level adventures. I think this has come up on your reviews a number of times. Are you any closer to cracking this ultimate mystery of old school player doing a really good high-level adventure, or how it would be done, or are there any?
I know what the problem is. The problem is the spell list. The problem is the spell list. So if you look at the D&D spell list, it's written for an exploratory dungeon. You can see a back and forth between the DM and the players, like no alignment. The DM has put in some jerk doppelganger or something who has fooled the players once, and some wizard has said, that's not going to happen again. I'm going to research a new spell. It's called no alignment. I'm going to know whether the prisoners we rescue are actually good guys. And so you see, I think the spell lists from the original game have made it into the modern version almost level for level. I think the only real consideration has been maybe some of the damage dealing spells and making sure that wizards aren't overpowered in damage. But I would argue that it's not the damage dealing spells from wizards that's the problem. It's the other spells. It's the meta spells. It's the no alignment. It's the ESP. It's the fly. It's these other things. That's what breaks high level adventures. We see this in, let's say, investigatory adventures, where the bad guy is always wearing an amulet of confuse alignment, a hat of mind shielding, 16 different ways so that the players can't figure out he's the bad guy. Well, that's because you've written it for the wrong level. If you wrote it for first level, they wouldn't have those spells yet. Or if you were playing in a campaign that had a different spell list and shifted that sort of spell to a higher level, then it would make more sense. The same with, let's say, fly spells or gate spells or dimension doors. Those make total sense in a typical exploratory dungeon. But once you get to these high-level adventures where you see the wizard has cast 196 wish spells in order to make sure that you can't dimension door or teleport or fly, essentially forcing people to walk down a corridor, that shouldn't be a high-level adventure. That should be a first level, second level, third level adventure. The spell lists are written for a game where you become very powerful at 9th or 10th level. You are essentially a baron at that point, or you have your own domain. If you want to run high-level adventures in D&D, I think you have to keep that in mind. It can't just be the normal everyday challenges. It has to be more social and I think more nuanced. Or you have to run a game in which the spell list is completely different, in which it's completely rebalanced for shifting the social element spells or the meta spells higher.
Right. I think it's kind of like the internet, because the internet's made it relatively easy to get any kind of knowledge like very, very quickly. And so arguments, which used to be about what a fact is, are now about what the meaning of a fact is. And high-level D&D sounds a bit like that. It's relatively easy to find anything out and to go anywhere. And so to make the adventure, instead of it being a challenge-based where you have to find the thing, work out what's going on, there have to be more complex meanings to what's going on. And a genuine question.
Which takes more effort to write, more originality, and more creativity.
Right. Here's a question from the Johnny Normal, which I didn't ask previously because I didn't really want the drama, but we'll see what you think. What is the future of the OSR?
Oh. What's the future of the OSR?
Exactly right.
Vibrant? I think the OSR is successfully worming its way in as a thought leader. I think we continually see that innovation is happening in the OSR, and it's not happening in the other lines of gaming, fantasy gaming in particular. And I think those concepts are influencing folks in those lines, both creators and players. And I think slowly but surely we will begin to see some of these ideas infiltrate more mainstream fantasy gaming, and they become more popular. I think that's probably where the future is. I don't see it dying. I don't see it segmenting. It's clearly, broken off into 1,000 pieces. Everyone does their own thing. Everyone has always done their own thing. And that's what has led to this sort of crucible of ideas and interesting analysis, interesting creations, your own Veins of the Earth, or DCO, the sort of interesting new ideas that you came up with there. Those are things that you typically wouldn't see in a Paizo or a WotC adventure. But I think that we will begin to see some of those innovations drift off into those lines.
Cool. Well, that's a quite a likable answer. I have like a few, let me see. These are less wide-ranging, but Roger Giunesarella wanted to ask, what are some good examples, if any, of history and background writing that adds to an adventure rather than detracts from it?
Oh, my. That's a hard question. History and background. So when the history and background is directly relatable to events that are going to happen at the table, that's great. Maybe a little bit of history or background if you expect the players to go looking for a sage, or if casting legend lore or something is a part of the adventure, or could be an expected part of an adventure. A little bit of history or background there might be appropriate. These sorts of long contextual, almost novelizations, though, once it reaches a page or more, you really have to start to ask yourself, is this adding to play at the table? It has to add to play at the table. I'm not sure I can name any off the top of my head. I'm sure that there are some. I'm sure I've reviewed some. I'd have to go do some Googling around my own website to find that. But again, I think it has to be directly related to what's going to happen at the table. At some point, sages, legend lores, these sorts of information gathering spells could provide relevant information. So is the background related to something that I want to know when I go see a sage? Well, then maybe that's, or is it just trivia? He was born in the year of the owl. I don't talk about that.
What you just said made me loop back around in my head to a previous question, which isn't necessarily related, but something I wanted to ask about, like the different play experiences, because you have a range of experience playing with people both online and in 3D. Have you noticed major differences in the kind of information you have at hand compared between online and in-person play, in particular with mapping and stuff like relating the imaginary space to what's going on? Because I found the way you use maps and stuff in front of people is very different to the way I use it when I'm online. Online, it's very hard for people to map because the map has to be in an imaginary space. It's hard for everyone to have the same access. And when you're modeling imaginary spaces, it works differently. Whereas if you're at 3D, if you're on a table, you can have these objects like sketch maps, which are equally accessible to everybody instantly like that, and where they can all write in alterations in query and use them to investigate them as much as they like, whenever they like. So I was wondering if you've noticed anything about that, and if there's anything that you would see in adventure design that could speak to that specifically. Is there a good way to design adventures so they work online and in 3D?
That hasn't been my experience. So my experience of online versus in-person gaming, I don't think I've ever had a problem with that sort of, information. I haven't noticed it, if there has been. Typically when I'm either running at a game store or at home, I'm the DM, and when I'm playing online, I'm just a player. And so I haven't noticed it in either situation. I will answer a different question, though, and that's the role of the map in creating fear and a mystery element. I remember playing with Jeff Rentz once at some con, and I felt like every time we went down a corridor and there was an unexplored corridor behind us, we had a choice of left or right, and we went left. I always felt like there was a pack of something down that dark, empty hallway that was coming to get me. And that's the sort of feeling that I think player mapping can provide, or let's say incomplete DM mapping. Once you have the full map in front of you, or once the DM is creating the map, I think the dungeon loses a lot of its mystery and a lot of the fear. And I think that mystery and fear is an important part of the game. I still, in my games, the very first time I saw D&D played was at the only gaming store in Indianapolis, up on a hill in this kind of hippie section of town. I think my sister was going there to buy pot, and she dragged me along. They had a piece of cardboard on which the map had been drawn, and then they'd covered it with newspaper. And as the miniature that represented the party moved along the map, the DM would cut out sections of newspaper, so it was slowly revealed, kind of
Right, scrapped or something like that as well. She has like a paper with like a hole in it and moves it along, so that's your lamp. And it's like you can't see.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's an excellent idea. And so I like that because it takes out the player mapping element, which is always a pain in the ass. But again, it also removes the uncertainty, and the uncertainty adds to this fear element. I haven't yet figured out how to have the player's map and have it not turn into an anal retentive 5-foot, 10-foot section. The quarter goes off at 30 degrees. That's 38 degrees, sort of.
Right. That kind of brings me back to an idea I've had regarding dungeons in particular, but maybe D&D as a whole, which is a lot of the artifacts you use are kind of inverted in some ways, because a dungeon is a space that's meant to feel like it's very dense and close and is very hard to explore. But in reality, if it's well designed, there are like loops and hidden passages everywhere. There's multiple options. So in fact, it's kind of not necessarily easy, but it feels like you're trapped. But in reality, there are lots of things you could do. And that struck me as relating to something you mentioned in your list of review standards about traps, which is there should always be signs, they should be found, which is something that comes up a lot in old school design ideas, so I was wanting to ask you in relation to that, is a trap in a game by its nature designed to be found? And does that mean it's basically not a trap, like it's a weird Buddhist koan of a trap? Like
That's a great observation. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but I think you're right. I think traps are made to be found. At lower levels, traps are made to be found because of clues, right? You see a dead body or an arm cut off or something. So it's almost like it's a pile of quicksand. It's something to be negotiated. It's an obstacle in the dungeon to be negotiated, hopefully. Unless you're fleeing fast down a hallway, I guess that's one of the dangers when you run away. You stumble into these things.
Sorry.
Okay. As opposed to, okay, you take damage, or okay, you didn't roll for search traps this thing, so now we have to slow down the game so the player can anal retentively say how they're searching every door. This sort of idea of a trap is an obstacle or yet another role-playing opportunity. I think the trap as a role-playing opportunity is interesting. This is what I think it is. It's a back and forth between the DM and the players. It's a puzzle, but it's just kind of a well-regulated puzzle, or it's a standardized puzzle. There is one puzzle that DMs turn to a lot. It's called the trap. Maybe the second one that they turn to a lot is some sort of riddle, something, or I don't know.
Riddles. I kind of have mixed feelings about the trap as being not really a trap, because I feel like there should be times when a trap is just a trap, and it teaches you through pain, basically, where it's like, it isn't fair. And at some point, maybe an old school whisper, oh, the dungeon is trapped, or you'll see one thing. But after that point, it's like, no, you can definitely die from these traps. And unless it's willing to hurt them, it's kind of almost as if it robs them of the ability to, the reaction of investigating, or the idea of looking for stuff.
But how do you do that without slowing the game down? How does that evolve to the player saying to the DM, every 5 minutes, I poke the floor I search for traps, I roll the dice, oh God, just shut up, I just want to play D&D, this isn't D&D.
Yeah, I know, it's almost, to me, it's like an almost it's a polarity where you can't really have both, but it seems like if you go really far one way, then it's like, oh, I see another skeleton with like a bolt through it, I guess there must be a trap here. Oh, I see another patch of grease glimmering on the floor, there must be a trap here. Whereas if you go far the other way, then you end up in your world of like, I poke the 99th tile, does anything happen? No. Okay, I put water on it, does anything happen? No. Okay, 20 more things to do to this tile, and we go to the next room.
That's a bad DM, right? There was a bad DM involved there at some point, either currently or in that player's past. But it gets back to the spell-list thing again, right? So you can't memorize Fireball 5 times when you're a high-level wizard, because you have to memorize Find Trap, and you have to memorize all of these other divination spells. As the levels get higher, I think the traps move more into what you described of a trap just being a trap, and the consequences being much more deadly. thereby forcing a reaction from the players to shift the memorized spells from straightforward damage spells into, well, now I need to find trap. Now I need to memorize augury. Now I need to memorize legend lore in order to figure out which parts of the dungeon might be more dangerous, or is there a trap? I have 2 doors in front of me. One will lead to certain doom. Did you memorize augury? Did you memorize legend lore? Did you memorize, well, no? Well, then I guess you will next time, won't you, buddy?
That's a strange element of like the player ecology that I hadn't thought of. That's interesting. I didn't know that. One question here from David Sugars, which I'm sure I asked before. Regarding layout, do you prefer game mechanics to be separated from fluff or integrated? I'm guessing as far as that refers to adventures. I think almost everyone's response who has anything to do with adventures is they want mechanics highlighted, boxed, with an effing like arrow pointing to it saying this is the mechanic, and they want it next to the part of the map that it applies to. That's my response to it.
I think I don't like mechanics in general. So if it is, let's say, an adventure-wide mechanic, if I am earning diplomacy points, then I think I want a little section boxed off that says, hey, we've got this thing called diplomacy points. This is how they work. This is how the players might earn them. And you can go look on page 12 for the consequences of what's going on. But if the mechanics are smaller, if the mechanics are you need to roll a 15 or higher to find the trap, or the mind flayer eats your brain on a 1 or 2 on a 1d6, I really like to see those more integrated into the text where the issue appears, so essentially in line, or I don't want to see them at all. So if there's a trap, I don't want to be told what the number is to find the trap. We already know what the number is to find the trap. It's been published in a million different books. Just say it's a hard trap to find, and I'll go look on the table for what hard trap is. Or I already know what a thief's skill to find a trap is. It's 1 or 2 on a d6 or something like that. There's no reason to include these sorts of baseline mechanics. When it comes to things like I've introduced a new element, I have a new monster called the Mind Flayer, and he eats your brain, and he does that when he rolls a 1 or 2 on a d6. Very short, eat your brain 1 or 2 on a d6. That's exactly what I'm looking for in line to the text. So I guess it depends on the level of the mechanic and the scope of it.
I think I would agree that thinking about what you said, I think there are 2 points where I like meaningful, chunky mechanics, and one of them is a global mechanic if it applies to the whole adventure. And even then, I only want 1 or 2, and I want it to be like, this is the adventure where we find chickens, so here's our chicken recording mechanic. You better catch them all, and that's what you're doing for the whole thing. And the other one is like the very special episode mechanic, where it's like, you go into the room with the giant orb. Oh, the orb we've been looking for like 3 sessions. And there's like a page of like, this is what the orb can do. And then it's okay, because then it's like exciting.
Yeah, right.
But any more than that, I think, yeah, like one number or a single descriptive word will be fine. Let me see, do we have any questions left? Just one of my crazy anti-story gaming reactionary questions. One last one. Are scenes bad? And I'm talking here about the way we encode what happens in the game as a scene rather than as like, this is a place, or this is the problem you're facing with, or character you're meeting, but like literally it's a scene as if you would see in a movie or a book. Because whenever I see this, I get like my spikes extend from my back like a gremlin in like a John Landis movie, and my hands break into claws. I don't know why I hate it so much, but conceiving as an imaginary space as a scene rather than a place kind of properly gets at my ass. I was wondering what you thought of that.
So I'll turn that around a little. I think if we think about different sorts of adventures, we might have an exploratory dungeon, and we might also have a social adventure. Well, let's say we've got a bunch of these things linked together. If there is a social element of an adventure, let's say a ball that you need to go to find information or something, I think writing that as a scene, or rather writing a social encounter as a scene, is okay. If you go to the ball, then there are these NPCs to interact with. My office is right by a fire station.
They found us, so hurry up.
Somebody's on fire someplace. So social I think adventures have a much more different set of things that they need than an exploratory dungeon. And I think they lend themselves to scenes much better. Here's the environment, a brief description of the location, along with perhaps more concentration on the NPCs and their personalities and their interactions, and a list of events that might happen during that. I would call that a scene, and I would say that's appropriate for a social role-playing part of an adventure. But a bunch of scenes linked together, that's not an adventure, right?
That's interesting. Why would you say it's not an adventure? Well, I think others might disagree.
Because it's a fucking railroad, that's why. Because if there is no difference, if I go from scene 1 to scene 2 to scene 3 to scene 4, scene 2 must follow scene 1. So I guess I did scene 1 successfully and there was no chance to fail. And I guess I did scene 2 successfully and there was no chance to fail. There's got to be some ability of the players to control the outcome, to fail or to come up with other solutions. And I just don't see how that's possible with a series of interconnected scenes, or rather, perhaps maybe I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's all the questions that I had, and that hits us about an hour, which is convenient. Is there anything that you'd like to, that I haven't asked you, that you'd wished I'd asked you, or anything you really wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I think I think you've done a great job here.
Cool. And in
I need a product to hype.
Exactly right. I was going to do like the chat show, and when's your latest thing out, Bryce?
Well, my reviews come out Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday.
Right.
Maybe, or maybe not if you're in a different time zone. I don't know.
So we'll link those in the description below, and don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe. Thank you very much for coming, and it was a pleasure to have you. Even if I couldn't have you and Mellon together, it was nice to see you both separately. I have to think of the anyone else I want to interview, but everyone, that was Bryce Lynch. So thank you very much for your time, and I might do this again, I don't know.